This building is the epicenter of contemporary art in St. Louis. CAM, short for Contemporary Art Museum, was built over a decade ago. Inside are exhibits by some of the top modern artists of our time. Today, a fresh wave of energy radiates from the building thanks to its new director, Lisa Melandri. Lisa's enthusiasm permeates every corner of the institution. On the heels of her first year at the helm, I sat down with Lisa to talk about art and her new life here in St. Louis. Tell the viewer a little bit about you and your educational background, your professional background.
Well, before coming here, I was in California for 11 years and working at the Santa Monica Museum of Art, which interestingly is a very, very similar place, a similar kind of museum to the Contemporary, in that it's a contemporary art museum with changing exhibitions and no permanent collection. So I'm very familiar with this kind of dynamic, changing exhibition model, and I find it really quite thrilling because it does allow you to have a kind of different experience every time you walk in the door. Prior to that, I was in Philadelphia, but I actually grew up in the Boston area and went to school in the Boston area. I was an undergraduate at Harvard University and then graduate school at Williams, and during all of that time studied art history, not just contemporary and modern, but also medieval and Renaissance, and was very, very taken always with sort of what visual objects said about the cultures in which they were made and how they could change someone's perspective on what they were seeing. So it's interesting, I've sort of come back around to a place with seasons. And
we definitely have seasons.
Exactly. Unpredictable weather, very similar to New England, and a sort of cityscape that reminds me of my childhood, you know, very, very different from the sprawl of Los Angeles.
Well, what was it about St. Louis that intrigued you?
Well, I have to say the very first thing that really intrigued me was this museum, was the place that it held in the community, but also its physical stature, I think, is so kind of exciting to come to a city where contemporary art is deemed so very important that it is given this kind of hallowed hall, if you will. And then when I started coming to St. Louis, I was really amazed. The very first thing that struck me was that culture was so central to the life of the city and that it was free in so many capacities, because I think that that's something that really speaks volumes about how important visual culture, but the arts in general, are to a city, and that's a pretty thrilling environment in which to be. So I became very, very interested in the kind of society that put that so much at the forefront of what they were doing. Then I also really, really enjoyed, quite frankly, how beautiful the city is, you know, the downtown, the architecture, the neighborhoods, and all of that. So it was a really nice kind of journey of discovery for me, because I was not familiar with St. Louis before I, you know, had anticipated coming here to the Contemporary.
Also known as a great flyover by a lot of people on the coasts.
Yes, but I think that that's because coastal cities are too self-involved. How about that?
And you had the proper droll face on when you said that, too.
Yes.
When you arrived here at the Contemporary, how would you assess the state of the museum?
Well, I think that the museum has been a really, really important beacon for, again, this idea of changing one's perspective, right? That it was a place that had become very much known and had a wonderful reputation for being able to provide a perspective on art making and what the definition of contemporary art could be and how wide that is. And that really feeds a culture, it feeds a city, it feeds, you know, the people that live here and gives them new perspectives. So that part was really wonderful. The one thing that is on my mind constantly, and this was the case in California as well as here, is making sure that that is something that more and more people have access to, you know, so ever broadening the circle of people who do wish to have that kind of experience and walk through the door.
You've been very generous so far in talking about St. Louisans in relation to contemporary art, but really, what do you think the appetite is for the audience here in St. Louis toward contemporary art?
Well, I think it's very good, but I think that, you know when you're involved in a contemporary art museum that this is not for everyone, right? That there are a lot of preconceived notions about, will I understand it? Is it for me? Is a museum for me also, not even withstanding what you might find when you walk through the door. So I think that you have the same number of challenges here that you have in other places as well. And what does that mean? That means making sure that people who live here become, that it's a given for them to come in. You know, people are probably quite sick of me talking about me wanting this museum to be a living room, to be a gathering place or a piazza.
Exactly what do you mean by that? Kick off the shoes and...
Yeah, well, actually, to a certain extent, that's exactly what I mean. I think what I mean is that you should consider this a place that will be welcoming, and welcoming in every way. One is, yes, you come in, you look at the art on view. Welcoming in that there's staff here, it's a kind of intimate experience, it's a smaller scale institution, so people can answer your questions, so that you never have to feel intimidated to ask a question, which I think is also really important, you know, being able to not worry about feeling stupid or not worry about being intimidated, and that you can really instead say, excuse me, I don't understand this, can you help me with this? Or why is this a part of this exhibition? I don't necessarily think that question, why is this art, or even is this art, is the most interesting question. I think the question is, help me understand, or could you help me understand what this piece is about, or what it's connected to, or how it connects us to the world at large, or what this form means, or what this lack of form means, quite frankly. I also, though, going back to this idea of the living room, I want people to come in. We have this wonderful harvest table in our cafe, which I think is the perfect place truly to loiter and to linger. And for me, we will have had real success if, you know, when I come downstairs and walk through the galleries, there are as many people looking at the art as there are also sitting in the chairs there and just spending time. That this building is for the public, and I want desperately for the public to see it as theirs. So
you recognize that for a lot of us, myself included, contemporary art is a bit challenging, a bit intimidating, and you're working to try to solve that for us.
I get that, and that's really fair. And I think that the biggest shift that we need culturally, and this isn't an issue of St. Louis, you know, this is really global, is that people need to feel empowered to be challenged. So what do I mean by that? So when you come in and you see something that just quite frankly does not float your boat, or you don't get it, you should be able to ask for help in understanding it. Now, maybe I give you that help and you say, okay, that's fine, but I still don't really like this, or it doesn't work for me. That's actually fine. I think that's part of the critical pleasure of coming into a museum. You know, I go to plenty of museum shows where I'm not buying what they're selling, as it were.
So as a professional, you don't always, quote, get it?
No, of course. I think there are always things, or things that maybe even I get, but they don't touch me. You know, they don't move me. I don't maybe appreciate one thing as much as another. But I actually love that experience. I love the experience of trusting one's instincts enough to be able to have an experience, look around the room, and decide whether or not I like it. I'll also say that one of the most wonderful things, and the thing that you really want audience to understand, is you may not like it, but that should never be a reason for you not to come back, because it's all part of a kind of amassing of visual culture and experience.
There's
right?
nothing wrong with me or you if you don't like something.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I think that again, that empowerment of being able to say, I trust myself enough to have this experience, to wish to be exposed to something that I might not recognize or I might not know. It doesn't work for me, but you bet I'm going to come back next time.
But does that point out a problem in the way we teach people about art? That it's, you know, you're supposed to look at a great work of art and say, oh, I understand that, I get it. Oh, how, I could never do something as talented as that.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to walk in and assume that someone has chosen this as, this is art.
Yeah.
And we're not used to going in and saying, I don't understand this.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. You know, there's this wonderful, just to sort of put things in historical perspective. You know, if you think about Impressionism and the fact that Impressionism is really beloved by our culture, right? I mean, it's a really, really appreciated,
An accepted form of art. Yes.
Beautiful thing. And we have great appreciation for it. But if you look at the reviews and the critical writing, you know, starting in the 1880s, 1890s, about what these artists who we have come to think of, you know, Monet, and, you know, you begin to think of these as the real center
artists.
of the
Yeah.
canon of art history. It was one of the most singularly made fun of, detested art movements. And it was all because in that moment, it was unrecognizable. It felt unfamiliar. People didn't understand that kind of breaking apart of the picture plane. They found it sort of almost a slap in the face to skill. And I think what's really interesting about that is that you realize that when we look at something that we're unfamiliar with, we're often made uncomfortable by it. And so, you know, we have a job to do with regard to contemporary art, which is to show the widest range of what that art can mean. Now, it can mean painting, it does mean painting, but it can also mean something as strange and as subtle as A Column of Air by Michael Asher. Things that make you rethink space and time and what a viewing experience is. So I think it's all really about teaching ourselves, teaching our children, having this part of learning which is about not facts, not about the given, but about the things that you don't understand or the things that are totally new to you. And I do think we don't put enough emphasis on the pleasure of the unexpected. And rather than having an immediate negative reaction to the unexpected, having that moment where you say, I've never seen that before, and that can be a very, very positive, in fact, incredibly delicious experience.
Lisa herself is certainly not one to shy away from new experiences. She and her husband, the artist Jordan Gauntz, embrace their new life in St. Louis with enthusiasm.
I am awed at what a smooth transition we have met.
Well, I think it's the people of St. Louis, too, are
absolutely
warm and welcoming and just very friendly.
Yeah.
And great to get along with.
It's true. It's been really wonderful.
We visited Lisa at her home in the Tower Grove neighborhood. And like Lisa herself, the home is warm, inviting, and unassuming.
Almost everything that we have as objects means something. We're not acquirers.
If you ask Jordan what makes Lisa tick, you'll hear about her openness and her generosity.
She doesn't judge, and that's one thing I was really attracted to her by her, because when I first met her, she is obviously very smart coming from her background, but with her experience in the arts. And then we'd go out and she'd like, let's go get a drink. And then we'd go to this hole-in-the-wall, down-home place. And I'm like, wow, she's a real well-rounded girl. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that's fit for television, but it's true. I like.
It's true.
I guess Epicurean is the wrong word because it makes it seem like it's only culinary. But I do, I enjoy experience and sensory experience.
As you might expect from an art power couple, Lisa and Jordan both have strong opinions about art.
Do you guys share the same sense of what is art, or do you disagree on it?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think so. I think we
Mostly,
disagree.
but we have disagreements.
But
And I think that's good.
It's more a conversation.
Yeah,
And then she opens my eyes. Oh, I didn't think about it that way, and I think vice versa.
I think vice versa as well.
So how would you, in a sentence, define contemporary art? What is it?
That's a very difficult question to answer in a sentence, but I guess what I would say is that contemporary art can be anything in form, many things in content, but in all cases, what is artful about it is its ability to make us view the world in a way that we hadn't previously considered. I think that art, good art, interesting art, is transformative in some way. It really does make you think of the world differently. And that could be, again, in terms of a brushstroke, right, that is particularly beautiful, or a color that we haven't seen, a color combination that we haven't seen, or a gesture that is moving. But it can be, going back to this idea of the column of air, something that makes you completely reconsider space that you walk through every day, or that you sit in, or the air that you breathe.
In your time here, have you picked up on any misconceptions St. Louisans have about contemporary art?
I have, but again, it's really interesting because I think it's a kind of global conversation.
So
I think the misconceptions are that people, again, if the form is unfamiliar, then the question is immediately, is that art? And I'm saying that question's an irrelevant question. Because once something, it's really interesting, Jeremy Deller, the artist who's on view here now in the museum, said something really wonderful. He said, people ask when he's done performative things, is that art? And he said, by the time I've been asked that, the object, the concept, the performance is already out there. It's live, it's already happening. And therefore, the question of, is it something, becomes irrelevant. It's more the question of, well, what is it?
Yes.
Right? I think that's a really interesting thing. So not is this art, but what is this? And I love that question. I think that's, the most interesting thing to think about.
Well, what is your job here? What do you have to do on a daily basis to keep the doors open and the lights on?
Well, I think that the job is really about considering, it's a funny word, but considering the holistic life of the museum. And so that means not just who are the artists that we choose, what do the shows look like, what are the pieces, but it's also about when the door opens, what do you feel when you walk through the door? What is the way in which you're greeted? What does the door look like? What are the things, the collateral, the pieces that can help you better access things? What does the harvest table look like? This kind of soup to nuts, big to small
So it's
view.
not only the art, it's the business of the art.
Absolutely.
That you have to deal with.
Well, and also, then there are the practical concerns that are at the forefront of every museum's life, which are, how are we funded? How many people can we serve? What is the level of ambitiousness of the programming that we can afford to do? All of those things, because I think this is actually a misconception, nonprofits really do have to run as businesses, they must. And I think there are all kinds of preconceived notions that we're a different kind of animal altogether, but in fact, the accounting department runs the same way that it would in any kind of business. And so I think what's different, and I think what's at the core of what we do, is that whereas some businesses might produce a widget, right, or a thing, we're producing an experience, an educational experience, an entertainment experience, an enjoyment experience, but that's our product. And so the business of what we do is making sure that that product, that experience, is the best it can be.
Well, and in your situation, you have to look at art and say, it's great, I'd love to bring it to St. Louis, but can I afford to bring it to St. Louis?
Absolutely.
This Deller exhibit must be very cost prohibitive.
This is our, this is kind of our version of a blockbuster, if you will. So I think.
We certainly hope so, anyway.
So yes, absolutely. And I think in terms of kind of looking at a program schedule as well, we have some really wonderful and ambitious programs. For example, we're doing a concert called Acid Brass, which is directly related to Jeremy's work, where we've commissioned a brass band to learn acid house music, and there'll be a performance here. And so those are exactly the kind of first run, if you will, unique programs that are really central to what we do, but take a lot of production, a lot of organization, and a lot of working it out on the pencil to paper side on the back end.
Does this work? Can we afford it?
Yeah.
We're going to go broke doing this.
Exactly.
It's a great art experience,
true.
but we're poor. So.
Well, hopefully never, right?
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully that's the thing that we can figure out long in advance so we can be sustainable.
But it's part of the art that a lot of people don't realize.
Yes.
That you can't just say, oh, let's bring everything that's good here, everything we'd like St. Louisans to see.
No, it's very true. And I think that the art world has become ever more difficult to navigate in terms of the very practical concerns of shipping and insurance. And, as those things have professionalized more, which is the good side of things, they've also become wildly costly.
Well, the snack bar behind us here is a huge piece.
It's true. It's really interesting. You've always had, I think a lot of us who have worked in this industry for many years have experiences of the behemoth, right? The thing that you had to literally take a door down or a wall down to get into the building. That's not what happened with this, but it is really interesting. Sooner or later, you have an experience like that where you think, oh my goodness, that wall's got to come out if we're going to bring this, so. But this is a modular beast, which is quite wonderful. And it was very fun as they were putting it together. There were these great moments where you came in and, the seating was up in the performance area, but the counter was here. It was very nice to watch it come together. It was really fun. It was sort of like Legos for the art world.
There you go. But now you had said something early on in a quote that I read, let me make sure I get it right here, that you want to make the contemporary more relevant and important to the global world of contemporary art. What's your vision on that?
Well, I think it all comes back to this kind of what is the definition of contemporary art. And when I say that, what I mean is that definition is so wide, that toolbox is so big that it's our responsibility to really kind of plumb the depths of what that can mean. So it is very important for us as a whole program, so over many years, as opposed to one season, but looking kind of with the long lens at being able to show all of these different things that make up the contemporary art world. In doing that, what we do is we become kind of the cipher, right? We become kind of the seismograph for what creative thinking is. And by being able to not only do these shows, but then have collateral, catalogs, website present, and all of that, and send that out into the world, we're really a part of that broad dialogue. We're really making an essential contribution so that when people say, what is contemporary art, or who is doing things that are interesting in contemporary art, or what have I seen that's new? Exactly. Then we're part of that dialogue, and I think that that is very important. I also think one way to make it very, very relevant isn't even just in the artists that we choose, but also in how do we do our programming? How do we do events and lectures and screenings that connect the art that's on view with all of these different interdisciplinary interests, to the world of film, to the world of dance, to the world of politics, to the world of social engagement, etc. And there too, if we are successful and if we've done our job, then I can make I Heart Melancholy, which is this fabulous piece here, not just an artwork in this show, but relevant to whole slices of the population who might not otherwise be interested in it as a wall drawing.
Do you see St. Louis, or in your plans for the future, you see St. Louis as being a preeminent place? When people think of contemporary art, they think of St. Louis, they think of the Getty.
Well, I think that that is one of the things, is that we're definitely on our way, because anecdotally, never having been here prior to beginning the process of, interviewing, I knew about this museum and I knew about the shows that they had done. And, it's a really interesting thing what colleagues say. They say, oh, that place has a great program, right? And that encompasses that they're making an essential contribution, that they're showing artists who are important and relevant, all of those things we just talked about. And so this is definitely an institution that is on the art world map. So then the good news is you only have to go up. I will also say that this is a city that has an excellent reputation for the visual arts. I mean, I think that's the case for us. I think that's the case for the St. Louis Art Museum. I think that's the case for City Garden. There are lots of instances in which this place is kind of on the art map. And so, we just have to make it better.
You touched on that a little while ago, but you come with a background of Los Angeles and Boston and Philadelphia. How does the cultural landscape in St. Louis compare?
Fabulously. Really interesting that I would bet, and I don't, this is one of those, you can't quote me on the numbers, but just again,
just
in terms
of us.
Yeah, right, exactly. But just in terms of feeling, I think that there are more per capita opportunities to engage with arts and culture than there are in a lot of larger cities. I think one of the most impressive things is just how many organizations, arts organizations there are, how cared for those arts organizations are, how supported they are. And that's not just visual arts, that's dance, that's music. It's kind of the whole view of arts here. So I think it's a very, very, very rich environment. I also think part of being a city that isn't as expensive as coastal cities, and where there's incredible housing stock, and where there are these amazing kind of architectural places that are just waiting to be inhabited for business as well as for residential. I also think that there are these opportunities for a kind of percolating creative capital that it's harder to do in a place like LA or New York or Boston, where rent is really high and space isn't available. So I also think that this is the kind of city that's ripe for even more of an artistic renaissance. And it's economics that allows for that. That's a really simple equation.
So we might attract a lot more artists to
Absolutely.
St. Louis because of the economics.
For sure. You could get a studio here. You could practice here comfortably in a way that would be extremely difficult to do in New York.
Is there a vibrant contemporary art scene here with local artists?
Yes. And I admit that I'm still, learning it, so I do not know the depths of it, but I have really enjoyed meeting a lot of the young artists who are working here, and the artists also that have been here throughout their careers and different kinds of work, some of them affiliated with universities, some of them independent, but it's a great scene. And really interestingly, also, again, not just for the visual arts, but sound and music, poetry. The arts in terms of practitioners are alive and well in St. Louis.
Well, I'm a St. Louisan by choice, not by accident of birth. And when I came here, I noticed that there is so much here, like you've just pointed out. Mm-hmm. But the native St. Louisans take it for granted or have experienced it and then don't go back to it.
and don't realize what we have in this town.
It's true.
How do you approach getting the contemporary across to those folks?
It's an excellent question, and I think that that is one of the single largest challenges, period, for any museum, any cultural institution. I think that you have to really balance the kind of more traditional marketing engagements, right, which have to do with media and advertising and those kinds of things. But I am getting the sense, and I'm not sure I'm right, that this is also a city where, you know, guerrilla actions and grassroots movements are probably just as efficient, if not more so, in getting to people. So, I mean, I think this is a city where, you know, flyers in the coffee shop really work and really reach out to communities who might not think of you as where they want to spend their leisure time. You know, like you might just not be on their radar, so to speak. And so I think that that's something that I really want to look into and try to figure out
Get
more.
a buzz for the
Yeah,
contemporary
I
where
really
it will be
do.
self-perpetuating.
I think it's an important thing, and I do think that this is a city where there's a lot of word of mouth, and there's a lot of, I think there is a lot of hunger for certain kinds of gatherings and places to go and different models for what entertainment is, and I think a museum fits within that perfectly. So it's just a question of figuring out, you know, how to get the bug in one's ear about it, right, and have it travel from place to place.
Well, if you figure it out, patent it, you'll be very wealthy.
I know, it's
Everyone's
really
trying
true.
to
I mean,
nail
as I
that.
say, like the challenge for all of us is always in that. But it is interesting. I do get the sense that we can do more in non-traditional channels here and have it work really well.
You've been here for a few months now. What do you consider your best accomplishments in the short time you've been here?
Well, I think even though I must absolutely tip my hat to the staff of the Contemporary because so much of this was underway, but I think that the actual feel of walking into the building is something that I feel very, very proud of. And what I mean by that is everything from not only the nature of the exhibition, but to the new front desk that we have, to the fact that there is a table in our cafe space and that we want you to sit at it, and you know, chairs in the lobby where you're more than welcome again to loiter as long as you like. And also I think our nighttime hours, all of these things are very much about changing the tenor of one's experience and really trying to put our money where our mouth is
It's more about
being
the audience
welcoming.
and less about the museum.
Absolutely, I think that's very important. We're starting tours every Friday night at 6 and 7 p.m. There will always be tours of the exhibitions. Drop in. It's a simple gesture, but again, it's absolutely, and it's very much about the fact that we're here and we're going to offer that. So come and take us up on it.
Lisa's second floor office at the museum reflects the eclectic taste of this arts leader.
This office, you know, when you look out, you see not only the courtyard of the Contemporary Art Museum, but the courtyard of the Pulitzer and that beautiful little sliver of Joe, which is that incredible Sarah sculpture. And I get great light, so it's great for the plants, but it's also kind of a beautiful view.
But what might surprise you about her is her passion for sports.
Well, I'm a huge Formula One fan, and
Plus a fan of soccer and football, and of course her hometown baseball team, the Boston Red Sox.
Need a new replacement for this.
people are going to get really mad at that because I've noticed that here in
Sox.
Cardinal Nation, that particular team is not so well looked upon.
think this
That's
is
my
a
license
felony to have
plate.
this in
I
your
know,
office.
I know. But you have to forgive me because that's a Kurt Schilling hat from when they first, when they won the World Series. For those of us, we waited generationally for that. So people have to be at least respectful of fandom.
Sure.
It is such a wonderful sports
Tradition.
town as this. And I will say, I've been to a couple of Cardinals games. Fabulous. Great stadium. And because it's nationally, it's all, I feel like it's completely okay to root for that.
Well, let's look down the road, hopefully a number of years, and you can say, wow, I did what I set out to do.
Right.
What would it be? What would it be that you set out to do that you'd say, bingo, that's it, I've grasped the golden ring?
I mean, again, let's bring it back to audience and say that I guess the most measurable result is a greatly increased attendance. But the less quantifiable result would be that anecdotal evidence from someone where they say, I love going there. I'm always thrilled. Even if I don't like what I saw this month, I'm gonna come back, because the environment that has been created for me there is so stimulating, dynamic, but also comfortable at the same time, that it's one of those places that's a must-see, must-go-to for me. And I think that that is really essential, because content in terms of artwork, that's what drives it. It's just a question of making sure that people are open to experiencing it.
So if you were to look at that camera right back there and address the audience directly, those people you would like to have come in here, what would you say?
Well,
how would you invite them into your living room, as you call it?
well, the first thing I would say is just try it. We are here for you. This is an institution that is public and therefore for you, right? It's for the public. And we promise that your questions will be answered, your conversation will be met, and that whether or not you like what you see, that we will be able to offer you a place to think of the world differently, that we will be able to offer you a perspective that you're not going to be able to get elsewhere, and that is a thrill, and that we want you to equate education with enjoyment, right? Those things are not mutually exclusive. So give it a chance, open your mind, you know, and hopefully we can work on really fulfilling a total experience where, I don't know, I sort of feel like the greatest pleasures in life are the moments where you say, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Hadn't expected that.
Right? So that's what we can give you. So take us up on it.